A single lie could save a life. Would you forgive, or would you punish? Ethan Rourke stood before the gleaming glass door, stamped with the bold Novatech logo, his eyes staring deep inside, as if trying to see past the cold numbers in the reports he read every day to find what had once built this brand. Trust. Dressed in a worn jacket with frayed shoulders, faded jeans and scuffed sneakers, he no longer looked like a powerful CEO, but like any ordinary customer walking into a tech store hoping to find what he needed. But what he needed today wasn't a new laptop. It was an answer to the fear that had haunted him for months. A customer complaint had been the final push for him to return. It wasn't about a faulty product, but a grave accusation. The staff lie and treat customers with disrespect. Those weren't just words. It was a verdict against everything he had spent his youth building. Ethan had started with a tiny shop, his hands always smelling of plastic, his sleeves covered in cardboard dust, tirelessly assembling second-hand machines for people who couldn't afford new ones. He still remembered the pure happiness of the first time a customer returned just to thank him for an honest piece of advice that had saved them money. He had always believed that real success wasn't in profit, but in earning the kind of trust that made customers come back. That belief had grown Novatech from a small store into a chain spread across the city. But now, standing at the door, Ethan hesitated. It took him several minutes before he finally placed his hand on the automatic glass door. In that brief moment, he asked himself, if the email was true, if his staff had really turned his store into a place that deceived customers, was this still his Novatech at all? His steps felt heavy, and when the door opened, it wasn't the familiar welcoming chime that struck him, but the chilling silence inside. A silence that made his heart ache. This visit was no longer just an inspection. It felt like a courtroom, and he was the one who would have to deliver the final judgment. The glass door closed behind him as Ethan stepped inside, each breath seeming to slow as his eyes swept across the scene before him. The cold white light cast an almost clinical glow over the rows of sleek, expensive products, making the place feel more like a showroom than a store meant to serve people. A group of employees clustered behind the counter, laughing and chatting loudly, their carefree tone completely out of place in a functioning retail space. One leaned casually against the counter, tapping on his phone, his indifferent gaze brushing over customers as if they were nothing more than an inconvenience. Ethan stood still for nearly 3 minutes, waiting for a greeting, for a single proactive glance. But nothing came. He finally approached the counter, his voice calm and polite. "Excuse me, I'm looking for a simple, durable laptop that's easy to use." A young man, without bothering to lift his head, smirked slightly and replied in a flat, dismissive tone, as if reading from an old, worn-out script. "Busy right now. Just check the website yourself. It's faster." Just one sentence, but to Ethan, it felt like a blade slicing through his own memories. He remembered so vividly the days when he stood behind a counter himself, when even the faintest look of confusion from a customer would make him drop everything to walk over, explaining every tiny detail with rare patience. He had once told his staff, "Never sell with indifference, because customers aren't buying products, they're buying trust." And now, the very phrase he had once despised echoed in the store that bore his own name. Ethan sighed quietly, though his gaze remained steady. He didn't react, didn't scold, because he hadn't come here to get angry. He had come to listen, to see with his own eyes the things internal reports would never show. Inside him, a feeling he struggled to name grew stronger, a mix of worry and a hint of fear, fear that the values he had built were being tarnished by the very people he had trusted. And in that moment, for the first time, he felt that perhaps the complaint in that email wasn't just an exaggeration. Ethan was about to turn away when a voice sounded behind him, smooth and just a little too confident. "Looking for a laptop, sir?" He turned and saw a man approaching, his appearance meticulously polished to the point of being almost cold. It was Adrian Cole, the sales associate known as the sales star of the branch. The gleaming watch on his wrist sparkled under the lights, his white shirt perfectly pressed, and his leather shoes polished to such a shine they reflected the glow of the tiled floor. Everything about Adrian was carefully curated, except for his smile. It wasn't warm at all, but more like a practiced tool honed to sell. Ethan nodded, his voice calm and steady. "I need a simple, durable laptop that's easy to use. I'm not very tech-savvy." Adrian's eyes flicked over him quickly, taking in the worn jacket and scuffed shoes, and a faint smirk curved his lips, a smile tinged with quiet disdain. "You're in luck," he said, his tone suddenly turning sweet in a way that felt fake. "There's exactly one premium model left. Just came in. Very rare. All my clients fight to get this one. Follow me." He didn't wait for Ethan to respond, turning sharply and striding away as if certain the customer would follow. Ethan did, his gaze quietly studying every subtle movement. Adrian stopped in a secluded corner of the store, crouching to reach the bottom shelf, a spot few people ever noticed. He pulled out a box coated with a thin layer of dust and held it up with a confident smile. "Here, take a look. Sleek design, powerful sacks, long battery life. Price is $1,800. No refunds, no returns. This is a special item." Ethan glanced at the box and immediately recognized the product code on the label. An outdated model at least 2 years old, worth barely half that price. But he said nothing. He kept his expression neutral, nodding slightly like an uninformed customer. His eyes paused briefly on Adrian's hand gripping the box. It wasn't the hand of someone committed to honest sales, but of someone accustomed to hiding the truth. Adrian's fingers tightened around the corner of the box, a subtle movement Ethan didn't miss. It was the reflex of someone trying to conceal nervousness or impatience. "No simpler models available?" Ethan asked casually, keeping his tone even. Adrian raised his eyebrows and shook his head quickly, his smile unwavering. "All sold out, sir. Basic models go fast. This is all we have left. Trust me, this is the best price you'll find anywhere." Ethan stayed silent, watching the way Adrian controlled the conversation. He spoke rapidly, leaving almost no room for questions. And in every sentence he skillfully repeated words like, "Only one. Rare. All my clients choose this." Like a rehearsed pitch designed to create psychological pressure. Inside Ethan, disappointment churned, not because he was being treated like an easy target, but because this was happening inside a store that bore his name. For years, he had taught his staff that selling was not just about exchanging products, but about earning trust. And yet here, right before his eyes, Someone celebrated as a star was proudly turning deceit into a skill. Ethan took a slow, deep breath, remaining silent. He didn't expose Adrian. Not yet. He needed to see more, to know if this was just one man's failure or a symptom of a deeper rot infecting the entire system he had once been proud to build. Adrian walked briskly toward the checkout counter without glancing back to see if the customer was following, as if he was already certain of his victory in the conversation. Ethan followed in silence, each step heavy, his hand tightening on the strap of his jacket to keep his composure. He was not a man who easily lost control, but the feeling of betrayal inside a store, bearing his own name, cut into him like a deep wound. Adrian placed the laptop box on the counter, smirking, and leaned toward a nearby colleague. His voice dropped slightly, but loud enough for those close by, including Ethan, to hear every word clearly. Easy as pie. The old man didn't ask a thing, believed everything I said, got rid of old stock. The younger colleague chuckled, answering with delight. You're good, man. First thing in the morning, and you've already scored a nice deal. Adrian raised an eyebrow, his eyes glinting with smug pride, his voice growing even more confident. You just need to know how to talk. Most customers don't know a thing about tech. You talk like it's carved in stone. They nod. Tell them it's new stock. They buy it without checking. Standing right behind them, Ethan listened to every word, his eyes narrowing slightly. Under the store's harsh white lights, he could see Adrian's expression clearly. Not a hint of guilt or hesitation, only the arrogance of someone who believed he was smarter than everyone else. Adrian kept talking, as if boasting about a great achievement. Guys like him are the easiest. Dressed like that. No way he can tell what model it is. Old stock has to be cleared fast. Leave it too long and the company loses money. The boss will probably praise me for this. Those words felt like a second blade striking Ethan straight in the heart. He no longer felt anger at being deceived, but a deep sorrow for the hundreds of customers who had likely been treated the same way. For years, he had believed Novatech's core value was trust. Customers came because they felt safe, respected. But now, right before his eyes, an employee celebrated as one of the best wore deceit as a badge of honor. Ethan drew a slow breath, keeping his face emotionless. He couldn't act now. An outburst would only make Adrian cautious, maybe even hide things more carefully. He needed to know whether this was just the bad habit of one employee or a practice quietly accepted throughout the system. Inside Ethan, a silent decision was made. He would not stop at buying this laptop. He would go all the way to uncover what was corroding the company he had built with his own hands. The next morning, Ethan returned to the store. He wore the same worn-out clothes, the same scuffed shoes, maintaining the appearance of an ordinary customer. But his eyes were no longer the same as the day before. They were calmer, heavier, as if he had prepared himself for an inevitable confrontation. The automatic doors slid open with their usual sound, but the atmosphere inside felt different. Ethan walked slowly toward the checkout counter, holding the bag with the laptop still sealed in its packaging. A few employees glanced at him briefly before returning to their chatter, paying little attention. Only Adrian, standing behind the counter, immediately recognized the easy-to-fool customer from yesterday. Adrian quickly forced a polite smile, adjusting the cuff of his shirt sleeve out of habit. Back so soon? Is there a problem with the laptop? I told you that model is rare. You'll be very satisfied with it." His voice carried confidence, but Ethan did not reply right away. He placed the bag on the counter, the movement slow but deliberate, and Adrian's smile faltered for just a moment. Ethan looked him directly in the eyes, his voice low, steady, each word landing like a stone. "Call your manager." Adrian flinched slightly, his polite smile shifting to a mix of surprise and unease. He tried to keep his tone light, as if to salvage the situation. "Is something wrong, sir? If there's an issue with the product, I can check it for you. No need to trouble the manager." Ethan didn't move. His eyes remained cold, no trace of the mild, mannered customer from yesterday. His voice dropped even lower, slow, but loud enough for every nearby employee to hear. "I am Ethan Rourke, the founder of Nova Tech, and I heard every word you said yesterday." In that moment, the entire store seemed to freeze. Employees turned sharply to stare. A few even dropped what they were holding. Adrian stood motionless, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously as if searching for an invisible escape route. His confident smile was gone, replaced entirely by growing panic. Ethan didn't give him the chance to speak. His voice continued, steady and cutting like a blade. "You have 24 hours. Either you tell the whole truth, or you walk out of here for good." A bead of sweat rolled down Adrian's temple. His hands trembled slightly, but no words came from his mouth. Silence hung heavy over the counter. Other employees exchanged uneasy glances, none daring to move, none daring to even breathe too loudly. Ethan remained standing there, staring at Adrian for a long moment, his eyes not filled with anger, but with deep disappointment. Disappointment for someone who had betrayed every value he had once held above all else. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan turned and walked away from the counter. His steps were slow but firm, each one echoing on the tiled floor with an almost unbearable weight. No one spoke. In that silence, everyone understood this was not an isolated incident. A real storm was about to hit Nova Tech, and no one would escape it if they had forgotten the true reason this company was built in the first place. One day, after delivering his ultimatum, Ethan sat in a small office at headquarters, staring out through the large glass window at the city beyond. He waited, but Adrian never showed, never offered an explanation, never made a call. It didn't surprise Ethan. Those who lied rarely had the courage to face the truth. Yet something about it felt strange, as if a piece of the puzzle was still missing. A man like Adrian, confident, cunning, someone who treated deceiving customers as a game, should have tried to defend himself or at least hold on to his job. So why had he simply vanished? That question lingered in Ethan's mind all morning. That afternoon, as Ethan was reviewing staff reports, his phone rang. A calm, professional woman's voice came through. "Hello, I'm calling from St. Grace Children's Hospital. Is this Mr. Ethan Rourke?" Ethan frowned, slightly confused. "Yes, it is. What's this about?" There was a brief pause before the voice softened. "You're listed as the emergency contact for a patient. His name is Adrian Cole. He wrote your name down in his records." Ethan froze, puzzled as to why an employee he had only met a few times would list him as an emergency contact. The nurse's voice grew gentler, slower. "He's not a patient himself. He comes here almost every night to care for his younger brother. The boy's name is Liam, 9 years old, diagnosed with late-stage leukemia. Ethan fell silent, his hand tightening around the phone. In his mind, he pictured Adrian with his shiny watch and smug smile. But now those things no longer symbolized arrogance. They looked like a fragile suit of armor, hiding a reality far more painful. The nurse continued, her tone hushed. He's been paying all the hospital bills in cash, refusing any financial assistance, refusing to borrow money. We offered help, but he turned it down. He always says, Liam doesn't need pity. He needs a strong, big brother. Ethan closed his eyes and drew in a long, steady breath. In that moment, the pieces finally fell into place. Adrian wasn't just greedy. The lies, the overpriced, dusty boxes, none of it was about wealth. It was all to buy time. Time for a little boy fighting for his life. Ethan stood up immediately. He didn't call his assistant, didn't request the company car. Instead, he drove himself in the same old car he had used back when he was just a technician, heading straight for the hospital. On the way, he didn't think about numbers, didn't think about revenue, didn't think about Novatech's reputation. The only thing on his mind was a 9-year-old boy lying in a hospital room, and an older brother who had chosen to bear humiliation and deceit just to keep that boy's hope alive. The hospital hallway was unusually quiet in the late afternoon. Ethan's footsteps echoed steadily against the white-tiled floor, blending with the faint scent of antiseptic that made him shiver slightly. He stopped in front of the door marked Pediatric Oncology, just as the nurse had directed. Through the frosted glass, he could see rows of small beds neatly arranged, the frail figures of a few children lying silently under thin blankets. His heart sank as he thought of the boy named Liam. He turned toward the adjacent hallway, and there sat Adrian. Adrian was slumped against the wall, sitting on the floor with his back pressed against it, his head slightly bowed, his hands resting loosely on his knees. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie loosened and hanging carelessly to the side, and the shiny shoes from the day before were now covered in dust. The warm yellow light of the hospital revealed a gaunt face, dark circles under his eyes, betraying sleepless nights. There was no trace of the arrogant Adrian from the store yesterday. Only a man exhausted, holding himself together against a harsh reality. Ethan slowed his steps, stopping in front of Adrian. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor from a nearby room. Finally, Adrian lifted his head, his tired eyes meeting Ethan's. There was no fear or attempt to justify himself, only a hoarse admission. "I knew you'd come." Ethan didn't respond. He simply sat down next to Adrian, leaning his back against the wall just as he did. A long silence stretched between them before Adrian spoke again, his voice stripped of all confidence, hollow and heavy. "I'm not going back to the store. You can fire me if you want. I'm tired. I have nothing left to say." His voice was worn down, every word sounding like a weight being dragged out of him. Ethan glanced at him and saw in Adrian's eyes something far more painful than regret, helplessness. Ethan let out a quiet sigh, his tone low and measured. "You've said enough. Sometimes silence is the loudest answer a man can give." Adrian lowered his head, his shoulders trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the relief of no longer having to hide. In that moment, Ethan no longer saw a dishonest salesman. He only saw an older brother clinging desperately to anything that could keep his little brother alive for one more day. And for the first time since this investigation began, Ethan felt no anger. Instead, he felt a deep, quiet sadness mixed with a compassion too profound to put into words. They sat there for a long time, neither saying another word. Only silence remained, but it was a silence that said everything. The next morning, soft sunlight streamed through the large glass windows of St. Grace Hospital, casting a strangely warm glow across the white tiled floor. Adrian had just stepped out of Liam's room after spending a sleepless night sitting beside his younger brother's bed when a nurse called out to him. "Mr. Cole," her voice gentle, "Liam's medical bills have been fully paid. All upcoming treatment costs have also been covered. Everything has been settled by an anonymous payment." Adrian froze, standing motionless for several seconds, his eyes widening in disbelief. His throat felt dry. His hands trembled slightly, as if he didn't know how to react. And then he saw him. Ethan, standing quietly at the end of the hallway, watching with calm, steady eyes. Adrian walked toward him, each step feeling as heavy as stone. When he finally stood before Ethan, he tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat, hoarse with emotion. "Why? Why would you do this? I deceived customers. I don't deserve forgiveness." Ethan looked straight at him, his eyes neither angry nor judgmental, only calm and unwavering. "I didn't do this to forgive you. I did it for Liam, a boy who doesn't deserve to suffer any more injustice. Let your brother receive proper treatment without having to worry whether you can afford tomorrow's bills." Adrian stayed silent, his eyes red and glistening. He couldn't bring himself to say thank you, only managed a trembling nod. Ethan sighed, pulling a file folder from his coat pocket and handing it to Adrian. "I'm not firing you. This is a new position, warehouse manager at headquarters. You'll work remotely, less pressure. I don't need a salesman skilled in deception, but I believe you can become an honest manager. And more importantly, Liam needs you more than Novatech does." Adrian took the file, his hands shaking as he flipped through the first few pages. He looked up at Ethan, his voice soft, almost afraid to disturb the quiet around them. "I don't know how to repay you." Ethan shook his head lightly. "I don't need you to repay me. The way you care for your brother already tells me you're not a bad man. Just remember one thing. Never let desperation become an excuse to betray someone's trust." A long silence passed before Adrian nodded, this time more firmly, a new resolve shining in his eyes. For the first time in many months, his face no longer wore the fake smile of a salesman, but a real smile, tired, yet genuine. A few weeks later, the story about Adrian spread throughout the entire Novatech network, not as a scandal, but as a powerful reminder of the company's true values. At many branches, employees began to see customers differently, less calculating, more patient, and genuinely kinder. Internal reports started to record positive changes, not in revenue figures, but in customer feedback. At headquarters, Ethan stood on the stage during a company-wide meeting. There was no prepared speech, no marketing slogan. He simply spoke one sentence, his voice low but resonating through the entire hall. Not every mistake comes from greed. Sometimes it's a cry for help we never thought to ask about. And remember, compassion is what saves a person, and saves everything we've worked so hard to build. The hall fell silent. There was no applause, no whispers. But in the eyes of every employee, Ethan saw something far more valuable than any figure on a report: understanding. Novatech was not saved by rules or strict discipline, but by what he had believed in from the very beginning: trust and kindness. In the late afternoon, pale golden sunlight stretched across the street in front of Novatech's headquarters. Ethan stood silently before the large glass doors, watching the flow of people passing by. In that moment, he was no longer a powerful CEO, no longer the founder of a major brand. He was simply a man who had spent his entire life believing that kindness could nurture a dream, and that dream, though once tarnished, could still be restored by the simplest thing of all: compassion. His phone vibrated. A message from Adrian appeared on the screen. "Liam is improving. Thank you for giving us a chance." Ethan read it slowly, the corner of his mouth lifting into a gentle smile. He didn't reply, because he knew Adrian didn't need an answer, and because what he had done was never for gratitude. A little boy was getting more time to live, and an older brother was learning how to smile sincerely again. That was the best answer he could ever receive. That evening at a small meeting, Ethan didn't give a long speech. He looked around the room, at faces that had once been tense from pressure, but now seemed lighter. He spoke slowly but firmly. "I used to believe success came from precision, from numbers and strategies. But no, true success comes from how we treat people. And never forget, everyone has their own story. A story that, if we take the time to listen, might forever change the way we see them." The entire room was silent, with a few lowered gazes and a few deep breaths, and then a round of applause erupted. Not the polite, obligatory kind of meetings, but a genuine one, coming from the hearts of people who had just rediscovered the core value they had unknowingly forgotten. Ethan walked out of the room, his steps slow but lighter than they had been in a long time. He knew the journey ahead would still be long, that there would still be mistakes, but at least today he was certain of one thing: trust could be rebuilt if we were brave enough to listen and compassionate enough to forgive. This story shows us that not every mistake stems from greed. Sometimes it is simply a silent cry for help that we never took the time to hear. A great leader is not just someone who knows how to punish, but someone compassionate enough to offer a chance to make things right. What do you think? Leave a comment with the 3 words "give a chance." And if you believe that compassion can change an entire life, don't forget to like and subscribe to help us share more meaningful stories like this.